Hello, my friends. Hey, Skinwalker, relax, please stop. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Wednesday, June 6th was my boyfriend's birthday. We'd both requested that day off but hadn't made any actual plans to do anything yet. When I got home from work around 4:30 the day before, he had made a spontaneous decision to go camping right now. There is a pretty well-known camping spot called Grayback Gulch only an hour away from us, Boise, Idaho, and, though I had never personally been there before, he had been there years before with his parents and grandparents and it was supposed to be beautiful. It is pretty deep into the woods considering Idaho is primarily a desert, not too far from civilization, and should have been an easy trip. We made a stop at Walmart for last-minute camping supplies, cheap second sleeping bag, dry firewood, food. Don't judge us. It was all very last minute and took off towards the wilderness. We were in a time crunch because by the time we were packed it was pushing 6 p.m. and we wanted to make sure we got there before sundown to set up the tent. I sent a text to my mum with the location of the campsite and my boyfriend's license plate number, telling her we would be back sometime the next day. She is an amazing mum, but sometimes gets paranoid and I didn't want her to panic if she couldn't get a hold of us. She would. Unrelated but kind of funny, the last song we listened to before our radio cell service cut out was the front bottom song You Used to Say, Oh, No, which ends with the vocals trailing off repeating no. I'm about to die over and over. It ended exactly as we hit the end of cell range, so after that, silence. We laughed about the seemingly ominous warning at the time and obviously kept going. After a relatively quick drive, we started seeing the signs for Grayback Gulch and pulled off into the entrance to the Boise National Forest. The path was closed, with a big no trespassing sign strung across the dirt road. We awkwardly sat for a few minutes deciding what to do. We were both in the mood to camp and we were already there, but neither of us knew of any other campgrounds in that area off the top of our heads. We were only a few miles from Idaho City, so we got back on the highway and kept going. Idaho City, for those that haven't been there, is more of a tourist attraction than a city. I've actually never been there while it's open, but it's basically one of those charming little historical sites with saloons and blacksmiths and whatnot set up for people to go see what old-timey life was like. There's also a small motel, a gas station, and a ranger station, so we headed to the ranger station for camping recommendations. A few minutes later we hit Idaho City and I shit you not, Reddit, the ranger station was closed. There was a piece of paper taped to the door explaining that it was their annual ranger field training day, so all rangers were out doing something else, and none of them would be available that day. Great. The only place that was open in Idaho City was a small market with an older woman working. She was nice enough but clearly not into the whole tourist scene. We inquired about Grayback Gulch and she informed us that apparently the bridge leading to that campground had collapsed about a year ago. She told us there were two options: pulling off the side of the road somewhere along the forest by mile marker 31, back the way we'd come, or going about 7 miles further to a place called Bad Bear. We asked which she would choose and she just said, "Oh, I don't camp here." We were both a little sketched out about the idea of just sleeping off the side of the road, so we loaded back into the truck and headed to Bad Bear. Bad Bear was very small but very pretty. It's not one of those campgrounds with an RV hookup and drinking fountains, pretty much just a dirt patch cleared for a tent. The forest was pretty thick, no hiking trails leading away from the site or anything, just the short path from the highway up to the campground and a nearby narrow stream trickling down the mountain. There were 6 or 7 plots marked for camping. Each one had a picnic table, a fire pit and a big metal pole with a hook to hang your food away from any bears. Like most campgrounds, there was a bulletin board at the entrance reminding campers to pick up their garbage and not leave any fires burning, along with envelopes and a drop box to put in your deposit. It was $15 a night for the single plots and $30 a night for doubles. As we went up to pay the deposit, we noticed that every single other plot they had a sign saying it was reserved. But by this point, it was 8 p.m. and no one else had shown up. There was also a porta potty up by the bulletin board, so I told my boyfriend to go ahead and start unpacking and I'd meet him back there in a few minutes. When leaving the porta potty, I noticed some stairs that didn't seem to head anywhere, just a few feet away. There did seem to be the makings of what could have been a trail, but after a few feet, the dirt path ends. I'm not sure if they were planning on expanding the campground or building it real or what, but being the sleeping fan I am, I snapped a picture in reference to the famous stairs in the woods Reddit post. I heard my boyfriend calling for me to come quickly. There was something I needed to see, so I rushed back to our site. There, in the forest, just a few feet outside of our camp spot, was a definitely man-made little lean-to hovel. It seemed to be made mostly of bark that had been torn from trees. The hovel was pretty small. You probably couldn't fit inside of it unless you were a child. But inside there was a relatively deep, narrow tunnel that went down a few more feet. We figured maybe some kids made the hovel when they were here camping at some point, and after they left an animal took advantage of it and burrowed into it to make a home. I thought it was really cool, but it sketched my boyfriend out enough that we briefly discussed moving to one of the reserved spots to be further away from it. We didn't want to risk getting in trouble, so we shrugged it off and finished setting up the camp. I took a picture of the hovel to later show my father, a BLM forestry and fire service employee. We pitched the tent. He chopped wood and built the fire, and we settled in to roast some hot dogs and marshmallows. Now is a good time to mention that I have an eye disease called lattice degeneration. It means I have shitty eyesight to the point where over my life I've squinted so hard the muscles wore thin and tore. That's not actually how it works at all, but it's the easiest way to explain it. So far I've had 2 surgeries for it, which repaired the tears but also made it so my pupils don't dilate anymore. This is only relevant because it's important to know that when it's too bright, or more commonly, too dark, I can't see at all. Debilitating night blindness. Huge pain in the ass. After sitting around the fire for maybe 45 minutes, the sun was falling behind the trees and I realized exactly how dark it was going to get out there in the middle of nowhere. I nudged my boyfriend and told him that we probably had about 15 minutes before I go almost completely blind. Flashlights help, but not very much, because my eyes suck at high contrast lighting situations like that. So we both realized I'd be depending on him a lot if I needed to get up to go to the bathroom or anything. We sat and talked and ate for a while longer. I'm not sure how much time had passed, but I know it must have been about 11 p.m. now. We were getting to the point where neither of us was really tired, but it was now completely blackout and we should probably turn in soon. The fire was slowly starting to die down. I looked at him sitting next to me and realized he was staring intently into the woods, in the direction of our tent. I tried to follow his line of sight but couldn't see anything past 2 feet in front of me. I pulled on his arm, asking what he saw. Without breaking his stare and in classic horror movie fashion, he calmly said nothing. There's nothing. But kept staring. It was at this moment we both noticed how silent it was. There were no bugs, no crickets, no owls or frogs, just the quiet babbling of the stream nearby and deafening silence behind it. I pulled on his arm again. Seriously, what do you see? It was then I noticed that he wasn't staring at our tent. He was looking right past it, to the hovel. This time he stayed quiet. He is an experienced shooter and had his gun on his hip in case of bears. But sitting there in the blackness I felt like a sitting duck, getting more nervous by the second. I kept nervously looking in the direction he was trying to see, anything to no avail. He stood up and tried to brush it off. "It's just so quiet," he said. "I really don't like that hovel." I thought I heard something moving. For some reason, this calmed me down a little. The idea of a raccoon or deer being nearby was comforting compared to the absolute silence. I told him that whatever lived in the hovel was probably just returning home for the night. I meant it to be sweet, but I don't think he saw it that way. I tried starting up another conversation about something else, but after a few minutes, he was staring intently again, scowling. Finally, in a quiet voice, he asked, "Would you be mad if we left?" "Left? Like, pack up and drive home?" "Yep." "Now?" "Yep." At this point, my heart was racing. I had no idea what he saw or thought he saw in the woods, and if anything happened and he took his gun and went to check it out, I would be sitting on a stump in the open, completely blind. I told him right now, "I can't see. I need you to see it for me. That means I'm completely in your hands right now. If you think there's something out there, I have to believe you, because I don't know. So if you think we need to leave, we should leave." He handed me a flashlight and grabbed my hand, slowly leading me over the rocky terrain. We gathered up our food garbage, snuffed out the fire, and started packing. We were trying to hurry, but with me not being able to see and him not being willing to look away from the woods, it was a slow process. When it came time to start taking out the tent poles and breaking them down, I could barely reach the top to untie them from the tent, so he had to do it. I held the flashlight for him and he quickly demanded, "No. Shine the light that way." I pointed the light towards the hovel and we broke down the tent in the dark. We were only a stone's throw from the truck, just on the other side of some bushes, so we made several short trips. We didn't bother putting the tent or sleeping bags away properly, just throwing them into the bed of the truck. The truck was probably only about 20 feet from the road, with just a line of trees for privacy blocking the highway from the campground. It was on one of these trips back and forth while loading the truck he heard it, a man's voice, coming from the road. We were definitely close enough that we would have heard a car and seen headlights, so we knew that no one had driven up. It went on for several seconds. It sounded deep, but definitely human, although it sounded like gibberish. He described it as if someone was on the phone, just one voice, speaking, waiting for a response, and then speaking again. We, of course, knew for a fact that even if someone had somehow snuck to the campground without us noticing, there was certainly no cell reception. We went into borderline panic mode, making one last dash to grab the last of the important things and bolting to the truck, probably leaving some last scraps of food and garbage behind. Sorry, Earth. We threw everything into the bed of the truck and sped off to the freeway towards home. We drove in silence for several minutes. I get nervous when we drive at night because I can't see the road at all, so it's hard to fully trust anyone driving when you yourself can't keep an eye out for animals crossing or potholes or whatever. We had the brights on, but it was still so impossibly dark and quiet as we were driving through the forest. I snapped one last picture and we drove straight home. Eventually, On the hour-long drive we calmed down a little bit. He apologized for making us leave but said he just had such a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach, long before he ever heard the voice. I told him not to apologize, that I was glad to follow his gut on this one. I jokingly told him that, based on everything we experienced, if I actually believed in that stuff, I'd say we encountered a skinwalker. His face fell and he got very quiet, so I kept talking. I told him how in creepypasta, skinwalkers live in the wilderness and mimic the voices and conversations they hear, usually to lure people away from the group so they can eat them or whatever. After a couple of minutes, he confessed, "That makes sense because it sounded just like my grandfather." He told me again how he'd been up camping in this general area before when he was a kid, with his parents and grandparents. He even remembers staying at Bad Bear once, but his father had horrible nightmares all night so they never went back.